Privyet and spasiba for watching, everybody. In this video I want to talk to you about everybody's favorite big Russian C-word, Dragunov. And by C-word I obviously mean character. Dragunov is hard to play against, and sometimes it feels impossible. Unfortunately, that's not really good enough, because if you're unlucky, he might make up as much as a third of the opponents you run into online. And so if you can't get creative about beating him and understanding why he's good, then he's going to completely destroy your ability to rank up in this game. And I totally get why people are frustrated playing against Dragunov online, because, you know, he's doing the running 2 and it's super cheap and it's very, very strong, and then he's got the down 2 as well, and you get salty. And I'm sorry, my accent slipped out for a little bit there. But yeah, let's talk about Dragunov and why he's so powerful. And what I want to do here is I want to compare him to another character, because I think that can teach us a lot about the game. So I think Dragunov is extremely powerful because of a simple trifecta that he applies constantly, of 3 extremely powerful moves, and then you tack some stuff on top of that, and you can really play him at a pretty high level using super basic stuff, right? So the first part of this trifecta is obviously the running 2. The low is the down 2, the go-to low for Dragunov. He really does not ever need to use any other lows than this low, unless it's a super specific situation. And then, in my opinion, what rounds out the whole package is the up forward 4, which is an extremely good mid. It's his bootleg hop kick. It leads to guaranteed damage. Okay, so I want to compare him. Let's take Miguel, for example. Miguel is a character, if you know about him, you know that he needs to apply his down forward 1-1 in his offense. It's a very important string for him. The problem with the down forward 1-1 is that the second hit is a duckable high, and so if your opponent knows a lot about Miguel, and if they have good reaction time, they can sort of duck right there and launch you for huge damage. Does that mean that the string is useless and Miguel becomes a bad character? Not really, because he also has the down forward 1-2, which is a punishable damage mid mix-up. So if you haven't thought about this yet, I want you to go into like your move list and consider your own character's design, because what you'll find is a lot of the time in Tekken, what they've done is you have to choose between a duckable high that is safe on block and a punishable mid that is going to catch people who are trying to duck the high. And so the philosophy about of Tekken is that if you're dealing with 2 players who have similar skill level in terms of fundamentals, what is going to determine who wins is who is able to make accurate predictions. And so if you're able to accurately predict what extension Miguel is going to use, then you can deal damage to him. And that's problematic for Miguel, because it means that every single time he wants to apply offense, he needs to put himself at pretty significant risk. And that's sort of at the heart of a lot of how Tekken design works and Tekken balance works. If we now consider Dragunov in terms of like the 3 moves that I mentioned briefly earlier, you've got the down 2, first of all, which is an unseeable low. And the philosophy on unseeable lows, you hear a lot of people talk about this. Ares, for example, he says that he considers unseeable lows almost like chip damage from a 2D fighting game. It's an interesting opinion, but I totally get what he means, because basically what he means is that these moves, unless you're getting hard red, because they're unreactable and people aren't just going to duck randomly because it's too dangerous, they shouldn't really ever get blocked. Unseeable lows should pretty much be guaranteed hits as long as you're applying them when you're supposed to, and you use them to rack up damage, right? So they're not really supposed to get blocked, but then sometimes they do, because in the real world things work out differently. But they're not moves that are supposed to get blocked a lot of the time. And this one is fantastic because it also has the range, the tracking, and the high crush. So it's got all the great properties right there, and you don't really need to worry about any other lows with Dragunov for the most part. You then have the up forward 4. The reason this is so good, I mean, we talked about how Devil Jin's version of this move is so extremely powerful, because if you want to use a move like this with a character who has a hop kick, yeah, you get a lot more damage because you can launch for a full combo, but you run the risk of getting block punished, which means that you really need to be confident in your reads or be whiff punishing to use the move properly. With Dragunov, you only get the 41 damage unless you're very close to a wall, when you can get more, but you never run the risk of getting block punished, meaning that you have an extremely powerful mid here for mixing up your lows that also has the low crush properties, meaning that if you just happen to be applying it when your opponent's thinking about doing a low, you can get amazing damage. So it's extremely powerful and it's extremely safe. Okay, and then the final move I mentioned is the running 2. Now, the reason the running 2 is so extremely powerful in this game is that the developers feel that they've balanced the move out because they've allowed you the ability to do this. Okay, the move is sidesteppable to the left, or at least I always sidestep it left. I think maybe some people like to do it right, but I think that's harder. But yeah, so it's supposed to be sidesteppable to the left, and so there's a specific way of dealing with the move, but if you're unable to do that, it has all of these amazing properties that are completely overpowered. And so I've talked about in other videos about how I feel that the ability to move sideways is something that happens when you become a sort of intermediate Tekken player, and so if you're not at that level yet, you don't have the ability to deal with this move the way the design intends for you to deal with it. It just becomes this extremely powerful, abusable tool that you can't really do anything about. And so that's problematic, because basically what happens if the move is not getting sidestepped is it could only land Dragunov in favorable positions, because if it gets if you get a hit, you get a knockdown for massive damage. If it gets counter hit, it launches for like more than half of the opponent's life bar, and if it gets blocked, your Dragunov gets something like +7 or +6 plus frames, and then he can apply a powerful mix-up, for example, down to up forward 4. And so yeah, it only really ever leads to possible positive situations and outcomes, and it becomes extremely low risk for Dragunov. And so he doesn't really need to think and worry about what his opponent is doing all that much at all. He can do this, he can do this, he can do the running 2, and what happens is, because of the extreme amount of okay, Miguel has to constantly take these risks to create his offense, but Dragunov, in contrast, takes almost zero risk in applying an extremely powerful offensive package. And so what happens is that all of the pressure in terms of the mind game, the reads, the reaction time, the character knowledge, the backdash, gets pushed away from Dragunov and onto his opponent. To be able to deal with Dragunov, the opponent needs to predict when this unseeable low is coming out and crush it. They need to know exactly how to deal with the running 2 that I messed up right there. And all of these things, you know, they need to know about Dragunov's silly powerful Oki. They need to be able to identify the animation of this throw and break you 1+2 and so on. Whereas the Dragunov himself can just really like do these moves and repeat them, and unless his opponent is a Jedi, he can get away with it a lot of the time without really having to, you know, get creative about playing real Tekken. And so that's why I think the character is so extremely powerful. And so what I want to talk about a little bit here is like how when I run into Dragunov, one thing I will do in terms of dealing with him is the first thing I try and do is chill out and get a sense of how good my opponent really is. Sometimes you run into people who are really good at Tekken and just happen to be using Dragunov, and that's very difficult to beat. But a lot of the time you can somehow get a sense of your opponent actually not being that great in terms of fundamentals. He might just have been able to overreach himself a little bit in terms of his rank because his character is kind of abusable. And when you get a sense of that, you can start to really work on creating accurate predictions that are going to allow you to beat the opponent. So what are some of the telltale signs as to whether or not your opponent is actually a good Dragunov player or just, you know, a typical online grindy Dragunov player? One example I can give you is if you get the hit by the counter hit running 2, are they going to go straight into, you know, are they going to do this combo? Or are they going to do a roll dash and go into a while standing 4? That is something that Dragunov had to do in previous installments of Tekken to get good damage out of that combo. And so it means if your opponent is doing that, it means that it's a habit that they've had for many years because they've been playing Dragunov for a long time. And it also wasn't all that easy to do at all in previous games, so it's an indication that they might actually be pretty decent. Another telltale sign, for example, is if okay, is your opponent going to combo like this? Or is your opponent going to do something like maybe this? That's a big difference, because one of these combos is completely trivial to perform and anybody can do it within 5 minutes of playing Tekken for the first time, and the other one actually requires you to know a little bit about the mechanics of how roll dashing works in this game and so on, and cancels and whatever. So there are a couple of telltale signs that I look for. Obviously, you know, are they using Korean backdashing a lot? It's a big divide. And another thing, obviously, if your opponent is really happy about doing a lot of snake edges, it usually means that they're not all that confident in their fundamentals. A couple of things like that. You know, how are they applying their Oki and whatever. And so if your opponent is, if you get a sense that you might actually have an edge on them in terms of fundamentals and knowledge, then you can start making some really accurate predictions. And so, for example, if you're at range 2 or further out than this, then the running 2 is definitely coming. 95% of the time, this running 2 is going to come out from your opponent. And so you can just look for it, and then when you see that the sort of timing, the little twitch in the opponent's character model, you can start using your counterplay. Now, I mentioned that a good way of dealing with this is to sidestep left, but that's hard and kind of risky. The timing is very specific. So one thing that I do, for example, when I'm playing Eliza, for example, is I'll do this. I'll use her armor move to go through. As you can see right there, that was a pretty even trade for me and my opponent, but Eliza can get a guaranteed Moonglide 4, meaning that she does more damage. And so she can trade favorably with that move pretty easily without having to risk getting hit because she used a sloppy sidestep to try and avoid the move. Another thing you can do is if you're playing, for example, when I play Katarina, she has a very long-range, powerful, fast counter-hit move in the shape of her standing 4. If I'm able to like get a sense of exactly when the running 2 is coming, I can counter hit it every time and I can turn it into a massive launch, and so that's very good as well. Obviously, if you're playing a good Dragunov player and you're up here and he's doing like true instant while running 2 from range 0, then he's a pretty advanced player, and then it's just going to be an issue of playing real Tekken with him, you know, movement, fundamentals and whatever. I mean, good luck, but yeah, that's very different, and it's not what you run into most of the time, actually. Another big tip I want to give you is the down 2. Just look for whatever move he did exactly before he did the down 2. Because especially when less experienced players apply low pokes, they have a lot of habits and a lot of patterns that they haven't picked up on themselves. They'll do like, okay, I'll do 1, 2, down 2. And they do that a lot. And so if you can react to the down 2, maybe you can react to the move that precedes it. And that can give you a chance to like jump in with a hop kick or some sort of low crush. And maybe your opponent isn't even comfortable with punishing a hop kick correctly, and then you can get a lot of traction out of that. I should mention, by the way, that this pattern right here, like doing this into a sidestep into another one, this is very common, so you can actually react to the sidestep as well. The reason they're doing this is that this move recovers in full crouch, and so they want to cancel the full crouch with a sidestep into the background, so they do that, and then they can do another one right away. And so yeah, if they're doing it fast, it's not going to be possible to react to, but if they're doing it with a bit of delay like that, you can actually react to the sidestep itself, and then you can get a block on the down 2. I'm also going to mention, you know, obviously you want to break 1+2, because 99% of the time when Dragunov throws, he's going to use this throw because of how good it is, because of how good Oki it gives. And I think the most important duckable high that he actually does use every once in a while is the down forward 1-4. If you're playing against a good player, they're going to counter confirm this. They're going to delay it like this. My controller just broke. There we go. Like that. They're going to delay it and look for wall splats at the wall. But sloppy people will just like apply it out of nowhere, and that's very duckable, and you should launch it every time you get the chance to. But those are just some general tips. And yeah, that's my little rant on why I think Dragunov is such a good character in this game. I hope it made sense, and I hope we learned something. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to go to Tokyo for a couple of days and mess around, but I'll be back in my hometown here in Japan very soon, and we're going to make more videos. So for now, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye bye.